364 millimeters. That's how much rain slammed into Pinchang County in just 24 hours on September 6, 2025, the equivalent of 4 months of rainfall compressed into a single day that transformed Sichuan Province's mountainous landscape into a hydrological nightmare where entire communities vanished beneath torrents of mud-colored water. But this wasn't even the worst day. Northern Sichuan had already recorded its most intense rainfall of 2025 just one day earlier on September 5th, when 255.2 millimeters, over 10 inches, fell across Guangyuan and Nanchong in just 12 hours. This was China's infrastructure being systematically dismantled by water, not by war, not by earthquakes, but by atmospheric rivers. Welcome to Earth's Dark Secrets. I'm about to reveal how millions of people across 3 Chinese provinces found themselves trapped in a meteorological siege that exposed the brutal reality. Modern civilization remains helpless when the sky decides to empty itself faster than the ground can absorb it. Atmospheric siege begins. September 5th, 2025, 6:47 a.m. local time. The China Meteorological Administration activated its Level 4 emergency response across Liaoning, Sichuan, and Yunnan provinces as satellite imagery revealed something unprecedented: multiple atmospheric rivers converging simultaneously over southwestern China's mountainous terrain. Northern Sichuan recorded its most intense rainfall of 2025 on September 5th, with 12-hour accumulations exceeding 250 millimeters, 10 inches, in Guangyuan and Nanchong. Guangyuan experienced a once-in-50-year precipitation event, while Nanchong saw rainfall intensities that typically occur once every 75 years, both happening simultaneously in adjacent watersheds that feed into the same river systems. By 7 p.m., emergency response teams were receiving distress calls from 47 different municipalities as water levels began rising beyond every recorded flood mark in the province's modern history. Pinchang Catastrophe. 24 hours later, Pinchang County became ground zero for what hydrologists would later classify as a 500-year flood event. On September 6, 2025, Pinchang County in Sichuan Province, China, was hit by extreme rainfall, 364 millimeters in just 24 hours. The downpour caused sudden flooding, submerging roads, residential areas, and farmland. But the numbers only tell part of the story. 364 millimeters in 24 hours means water was falling at rates of 15 millimeters per hour consistently for an entire day, the equivalent of a moderate rainstorm that never stops. But Pinchang's precipitation wasn't consistent. Remarkably, no casualties were reported in Pinchang County despite the extreme conditions, but the infrastructure damage revealed something more disturbing: modern drainage systems experiencing complete hydraulic failure when confronted with precipitation volumes that exceeded design parameters by over 300%. Traditional storm drains became pressurized water jets flowing backward as underground systems reached capacity limits, creating reverse hydraulic pressure that turned manholes into fountains and parking lots into retention lakes. Infrastructure annihilation. But the real infrastructure nightmare emerged through systematic hydraulic analysis of Sichuan's flood response systems. Urban drainage networks, calculated for 25-year precipitation events, encountered rainfall intensities exceeding 1,000-year statistical thresholds. Yes, the infrastructure designed to handle 40 millimeters per hour sustained precipitation, confronted concentrated rainfall bursts exceeding 180 millimeters in 4-hour periods. Subsurface infrastructure failure patterns proved most devastating. While no casualties were reported in Pinchang County, underground electrical conduits and fiber optic networks experienced catastrophic moisture infiltration. 11 major highway interchanges experienced simultaneous drainage system overwhelm, creating systematic traffic grid paralysis, where traditional evacuation routes became temporary lake systems. Railway destruction. The Baoji-Chengdu Railway, a critical freight and passenger corridor connecting Western China to national distribution networks, suffered catastrophic engineering failures that revealed how quickly water can dismantle decades of infrastructure investment. Bridge Pier 47 along the Jiling River crossing experienced complete foundation, undermining when floodwaters exceeded design parameters by over 300%. The bridge hadn't just failed. It had been disassembled by hydraulic forces that carved away support structures with the precision of industrial equipment. 12 passenger trains and over 40 freight locomotives found themselves stranded across multiple provinces as rail connections to and from Sichuan were severed indefinitely. Manufacturing facilities in Guangyuan and Nanchong, dependent on just-in-time supply chains, began production shutdowns within 48 hours as raw materials and finished goods became impossible to transport. Agricultural devastation. Sichuan Province produces 30% of China's rice and 25% of the nation's rapeseed oil, but September's floods transformed these agricultural regions into temporary inland seas that stripped away decades of soil development. The Chengdu Plain, often called China's land of abundance for its agricultural productivity, experienced topsoil loss exceeding 15 centimeters across over 200,000 hectares of prime farmland. Apart from lost crops, floodwaters carried agricultural chemicals, fertilizers, and pesticides downstream, creating contamination plumes that rendered surviving agricultural areas unsuitable for farming for potentially years. Rice paddies that had been cultivated continuously for over 1,000 years were buried under meters of sediment and debris, containing everything from uprooted trees to industrial waste swept down from upstream manufacturing centers. Landslide chain reaction. As if the flooding wasn't devastating enough, rain-saturated soils across Sichuan's mountainous terrain began experiencing catastrophic slope failures that created secondary disasters throughout the province. A landslide on a highway in Sichuan Province this month also killed 5 people after it swept several cars down a mountainside. The Longminshan Fault Zone, already geologically unstable from earthquake activity, became critically dangerous as water infiltration reduced soil cohesion and destabilized entire mountainsides. Highway S205 between Dujiangyan and Wenchuan experienced simultaneous landslides at 14 different locations. Mountain communities found themselves completely isolated, not just by floods, but by landslide debris fields that buried access roads under tons of rock and mud. Rescue helicopters attempting to reach stranded populations discovered that traditional landing zones had been obliterated by slope failures, forcing emergency personnel to develop improvised extraction procedures in terrain that had been fundamentally reshaped by gravitational collapse. Economic cascade failure. Within 72 hours, Sichuan's floods triggered economic disruptions that rippled across Southeast Asia's supply chains. Electronics manufacturing facilities in Chengdu and Mianyang, critical suppliers for global smartphone and computer production, experienced complete production shutdowns not from direct flood damage, but from supply chain paralysis. Raw materials couldn't reach factories, finished products couldn't reach ports, workers couldn't reach facilities. Major international manufacturers dependent on Sichuan-produced components began production slowdowns in facilities thousands of miles away as critical parts became unavailable. Toyota, Apple, and Samsung, companies with extensive supply chain networks throughout Sichuan, reported potential production delays affecting millions of consumer products worldwide. Response overwhelm. Natural disasters in China affected over 23 million people and resulted in direct losses of 54.11 billion yuan in the first half of 2025. but Sichuan's September floods showed the most concentrated damage in the shortest time period. Over 15,000 rescue personnel were deployed across 3 provinces, but communication failures and transportation grid collapse made coordinated response nearly impossible. Rescue teams found themselves isolated in their own emergency zones, unable to coordinate with adjacent response units or receive updated information about changing flood conditions. The People's Liberation Army deployed engineering units equipped for disaster response, but they encountered infrastructure damage that exceeded every scenario in their emergency preparedness planning. Aftermath reality. 3 weeks later, Sichuan continues discovering damage that wasn't visible during active flooding. Underground infrastructure, electrical conduits, communication cables, water and sewage systems, sustained moisture infiltration that created delayed failure patterns where systems appeared functional immediately after floods but collapsed days later when accumulated water stress finally exceeded design limits. Building foundations experienced soil saturation that compromised structural integrity in ways that became apparent only during detailed engineering inspections. Structures that seemed undamaged during flooding revealed foundation settling and structural stress from waterlogged soil, losing load-bearing capacity. Dark truth. While Pinchang County remarkably reported no casualties despite receiving 364 millimeters of rainfall in 24 hours, the absence of immediate human losses masked deeper infrastructural fragilities that could prove devastating in future extreme weather events. Critical discovery through post-disaster analysis, urban drainage engineering assumptions, based on historical precipitation patterns, proved inadequate for emerging atmospheric behaviors where concentrated moisture delivery systems created localized hydrological extremes previously considered statistically impossible. As global atmospheric systems undergo fundamental reorganization, traditional infrastructure design methodologies require complete reconceptualization. As precipitation patterns continue evolving beyond historical precedent, China confronts a fundamental engineering question. How do modern cities adapt infrastructure systems designed for predictable climate patterns to address atmospheric behaviors that exceed every statistical model currently guiding urban planning decisions? The answer, as Sichuan discovered in September 2025, may require complete reconceptualization of how human settlements interact with increasingly unpredictable hydrological systems where traditional flood management becomes systematically inadequate for emerging planetary conditions. Call to action. Thanks for watching Earth's Dark Secrets, where we expose the hidden realities behind our planet's most devastating disasters. If this investigation revealed something the mainstream media won't tell you, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps us uncover the stories that authorities don't want told. Hit the bell so you never miss our in-depth analysis of the disasters that reveal our planet's dark truths.